Accomplish 100 murders. This is the ritual you must go through in order to become the Flying Death School sect leader. Once you become the Flying Death School sect leader, you will also receive a secret poisonous weapon. The Keen Benevolence Needle, a symbol of the head of the Flying Death School, was now in the hands of a brothel woman, an impossible scenario. The fact that she has this means she's now the sect leader. No way! Go-chan thought in disbelief. Ha-Chiron is the only variable successor of the Flying Death School sect leader. As the only family he had, he pinned all his hopes on Ha-Chiron. Everyone understood this. However, the problem was Ha-Chiron's damned personality. All the assassins of the Flying Death School believed it was impossible for Ha-Chiron to kill 100 of people because of that personality of hers. Go-chan still can remember how much of an arrogant little troublemaker Ha-Chiron was. Now, at 19, Go-chan only needed to look at her thrilling figure to know she had developed very well. Plus, with that charming face, many people would be deceived by her appearance. Just then, Ha-Chiron finally reached out to Go-chan and pulled the Keen Benevolence Needle out of his body. Go-chan can finally move his body. Just then, Ha-Chiron spoke. I didn't expect us to see each other again like this. Yes, I agree. It's been a while, madam. Before Go-chan could finish, Ha-Chiron interrupted. It's sect leader, which made Go-chan confused. I'm the sect leader now. Seeing her performance now, Go-chan began to wonder, had she really changed for the better? If so, perhaps she indeed qualified to be the sect leader. However, seeing that Go-chan still appeared doubtful, Ha-Chiron's gaze instantly turned icy. Don't think that just because you left the organization, you can disrespect the sect leader. After confirming his suspicion, Go-chan felt a wave of unease. Based on past experiences, the fate of assassins who left the organization was invariably death. Fearing that Ha-Chiron was here to take his life, he immediately knelt down, hastily exclaiming, "Greetings, sect leader." Seeing Go-chan's reaction, Ha-Chiron couldn't help but curse. Ha-Chiron smiled at Go-chan, saying softly, "Don't be nervous. My purpose here is to get close to the eldest son of the Mocksword Manor." She had heard that the first son was lecherous and liked to drink, so she planned to enter Mocksword Manor through him, but now it seemed unnecessary. I just need to go in with you. Go-chan furrowed his brow, not understanding the meaning of Ha-Chiron's words. Why did she want to enter Mocksword Manor with him? To this question, Ha-Chiron looked Go-chan seriously, her voice filled with a murderous tone. Assassin number 29, Guard Cam, the bodyguard. Hearing Guard Cam's name, Go-chan felt extremely nervous. I heard his assassination mission failed. Ha-Chiron continues. According to the golden rule of the Flying Death School, an assassination mission must be completed. So, my purpose here is to take the head of the third son of Mocksword Manor. Hearing this, Go-chan is extremely shocked. Meanwhile, Jong continued to practice the basic techniques of Mocksword Manor. Just 3 hours had passed, and he already looked as if he had been practicing for years. The sun was almost completely set, and Blue Spirit finally approached to speak. How long are you going to practice like this? Jong, still not fully satisfied, came back from his practice, looked up at the sky, and, seeing it was indeed late, said, "Right, then let's go eat." At this, Blue Spirit seemed to have been waiting a long time, her lips immediately curling into an excited smile. Back to Jong's room, a maid was focused on eating, while Jong sat opposite her with a book, appearing nonchalant. After the maid cleared the food from the table, a satisfied expression appeared on her face. Seeing her like this, Jong couldn't help but be curious, asking, "Are you really that happy?" The maid picked up a jug of wine, still not having enough, and said, "The greatest pleasure in life is eating. One day you'll understand." And this maid was actually Blue Spirit, possessed. For days ago, Jong had Blue Spirit try possessing the maid who brought her food, and Blue Spirit seemed to really enjoy it. But just then, bulging veins suddenly appeared on the maid's body, and her veins seemed to darken as if dyed with ink. Blue Spirit exclaimed in surprise, "She can't even endure 15 minutes. Seeing this, Jong thought, it seems an ordinary body can't handle a spirit of such a high level. Having had her fill, Blue Spirit looked at Jong and wondered, why are you too interested in shamanism? The book in Jong's hands, which Blue Spirit had obtained from Shua, was titled Six-Person Spirit Summoning Technique. Having witnessed Shua's use of familiar, Jong naturally became very interested in these methods. Just as Jong was ready to continue studying, a sinister presence suddenly approached. He furrowed his brow and turned his head. Seeing his reaction, Blue Spirit's eyes brightened, saying, "It seems your intuition has indeed become very sharp." Moments later, in Go-chan's room, he brought Ha-Chiron a set of maid's clothes, but Ha-Chiron merely glanced at them casually and turned her head away. "So tacky. I'd rather wear clothes from a brothel." Go-chan couldn't help but swallow. The situation was becoming more and more critical. Since encountering Ha-Chiron, she had been keeping a firm eye on him. Now, taking advantage of the moment, she changed clothes to slip away. How could Go-chan miss this chance? He put down the clothes and turned to leave. But just then, Ha-Chiron playfully asked, "Why don't you stay? Opportunities to see a figure like mine aren't common." Saying this, she deliberately revealed her impressive legs. Go-chan, who had never seen such a scene, blushed intensely. Just as he was about to turn back for a look, he heard Ha-Chiron's hearty laughter. "I'm just joking with you. I can't believe you took it seriously." Go-chan was speechless, but Ha-Chiron's voice came again. "Thanks to you, I could enter this place so easily." Hearing this, Go-chan felt bitter inside. It was not his intention. Although he he was reluctant, he still had to keep agreeing. I've been wanting to avenge my senior brother too. It's like I've got a whole army by my side now that you're here. Upon hearing this, Hachiron showed a satisfied expression. I knew it. As long as one is a member of the Flying Death School, even if they leave the organization, they are still very trustworthy. However, as soon as the words fell, a chill flashed in Hachiron's eyes. I trusted you. Just then, puff puff sounds rang out as the keen benevolence needles once again accurately pierced into Go-chan's acupoints. Go-chan looked at her, puzzled, not understanding what was happening. Hachiron giggled as she retrieved the needle on her right hand. Let's stop here. Did you really think I would believe those foolish excuses? Hachiron coldly walked towards Go-chan. Your predecessor is dead, but you remain so low-key. It seems you've changed whom you are loyal to. It's funny to watch you act like you've been waiting for a chance to kill that bastard when you're basically forced into retirement because of your uselessness. Go-chan is stunned, realizing that she had never believed him from the start. As she spoke, Hachiron pulled out the short sword and said contemptuously, to avenge your predecessor, you killed the third son you served, and now you've chosen to commit suicide. That's your ending. As soon as the words were spoken, Hachiron's sword stabbed viciously towards Go-chan's throat. However, just at the critical moment, with a snap, a hand reached in through the window, a powerful suction suddenly emerged, and Hachiron's short sword flew out of her hand. This ability to retrieve objects through the air astonished Hachiron, leaving her wide-eyed and flabbergasted. Just as she was taken aback, the door was kicked open, and the third son, Mok Jae-won, appeared at the doorway. Seeing this, Go-chan's tears immediately started flowing down his cheeks. This was the first time he thought this devilish man looked so cool. Jong gave him a smile. Go-chan, were you in danger just now? Hachiron, sensing that the situation was turning dire, she suddenly grabbed Go-chan by the collar, pulling him in front of her. The panicked Go-chan tried to break free, but given the disparity in strength, his resistance was futile. Meanwhile, Hachiron pressed the short sword against Go-chan's neck, threatening Mok Jae-won, if you don't want to see your guard die, you better not make any sudden moves. Hearing Hachiron's words, Go-chan broke out in a cold sweat. Although he knew Hachiron had previously investigated Mok Jae-won, the Mok Jae-won of now was no longer the old third son. She definitely didn't know that Jong before her never valued others' lives. He was thoroughly a devil. On his part, Jong indeed raised the weapon. Just when Go-chan thought Jong was going to charge at Hachiron, the weapon was harshly thrust into the floor. Go-chan felt confused. Alright, now let Go-chan go. Hearing this, Go-chan was completely stunned. Then, Jong's voice rang out again. If you let go of Go-chan, I will let you leave. Hearing Mok Jae-won's words, Hachiron's eyebrows lifted. His attitude, as if giving alms, annoyed her, but it also indirectly proved that he cared about Go-chan. It seems you really cherish your guard. I just think it would be a pity to lose him, so you better leave before I change my mind. Hearing this, Go-chan thought to himself, that demon is trying to save me? However, Hachiron escalated the situation. If you kneel and beg me, maybe I will agree. Upon these words, the atmosphere immediately tensed. Jong sighed resignedly and slowly began to bend down. Seeing this, not only Go-chan, but even Hachiron was immensely shocked. For the sake of a mere guard, he was actually preparing to kneel. However, things did not develop as they imagined. The next second, a cold glint flashed in Jong's eyes. He suddenly turned swiftly, pulling up the weapon from the ground and charged toward Hachiron. This action provoked wild laughter from Hachiron. I knew you couldn't possibly kneel and beg for his sake. However, as she spoke, she was surprised to find that Jong's gaze was not on her. He glanced sideways slightly. At the same time, a creepy scene unfolded. Hachiron felt a terrifying chill surge through her, as if her entire body had plunged into a pool of blood. Countless tentacles, like the claws of demons from hell, reached towards Hachiron's body, and clearly, something was approaching her from behind. Sensing this ominous presence, Hachiron instinctively dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding Blue Spirit's strike. In that instant, she quickly pulled on Go-chan's collar to retreat, while positioning her short sword in front of her, confused since there is nothing in front of her. Blue Spirit had actually anticipated this outcome. After all, a top expert could sense the slightest aura of a ghost spirit, so she would instinctively dodge as soon as Blue Spirit approached. However, Jong was no pushover. During the moment Hachiron was distracted, he swiftly threw his weapon, accurately knocking the short sword from her hand. Taking advantage of the moment, Hachiron released Go-chan. Jong quickly moved, smoothly pulling out keen benevolence needles from Go-chan's body. Everything happened so fast, Hachiron hadn't anticipated it. Although she didn't know what technique the opponent had just used, she had sharply felt that strange energy. So, facing Jong's rapidly approaching figure, she was not afraid. In her eyes, the person before her was too weak, and she only needed to interrupt him before he could cast another spell to easily resolve the fight. Moreover, aside from these, Hachiron still had her last ace up her sleeve. Her figure moved swiftly, her hand quietly reaching towards the weapon at her waist. Seeing this, Go-chan immediately felt uneasy. That was the Flying Death School's most formidable hidden weapon, the Extreme Execution Needle. At this moment, Jong was completely unaware of the looming danger. Although it could only be used once each time, it had a unique function that could seal the target's chi. He had planned to perform the ritual of of attachment again, drawing the weapon back to his hand, but suddenly found he couldn't muster any chi. Nearby, Blue Spirit also sensed something was wrong, but she couldn't intervene in time. Jong is frozen in place. Blue Spirit cried out in alarm as the extreme execution needle darted towards Jong's heart. Hey, Chiron shouted, die. Just then, a figure startlingly blocked in front of Jong. Go-chan came forward. He shielded Jong with his body. Instantly, everyone showed a shocked expression. The extreme execution needle inevitably pierced into Go-chan, and seeing this, Jong was utterly enraged. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and he shouted, Blue Spirit. A creepy shadow swiftly approached Chiron, sensing the danger, quickly shot 3 flying needles at Jong's head. However, Jong made no move to dodge. Instead, a suction force appeared in his palm, and the flying needles were forcefully embedded in his hand. Seeing this, Chiron was shocked. Keen Benevolence needles had unexpectedly changed their flight path. However, just as she was utterly astonished, dozens of tentacles stretched out, tightly entwining her body. Chiron was instantly thrown into panic. She wanted to escape, but no matter how she struggled, it was futile. Then a creepy voice resounded, you should have died when I was being nice. Meanwhile, a nauseating scent of blood emerged, and everything around turned into a sea of blood. Faced with the strangest situation she had ever encountered, Chiron fell into complete despair. Watching the young girl's pain and fear before him, Jong looked at her coldly. Jong shook his head. I clearly gave you a chance, but you chose to give it up. As soon as the words fell, Chiron's consciousness was completely engulfed by endless fear. Seeing this, Jong's face remained impassive. He slowly walked over to Go-chan. He wanted to say something, but didn't know what to say. At that moment, Go-chan slowly spoke. It's a pity. I won't be able to serve the young master anymore. To this, Jong asked in confusion, why would you do this? Protecting the young master is my duty. I just did what I had to do. Moreover, the young master has already sacrificed so much to save me. I couldn't just betray you. Hearing this, Jong fell silent. However, Go-chan continued to mutter laboriously, you are the only person who has cared about me in my life, so I have no regrets. After saying this, Go-chan slowly closed his eyes. But just then, a woman's voice arose. Is he really dead? The speaker was Chiron, who was supposed to be dead, but Jong knew that this Chiron was not the real her. It seems you have completely consumed her, Jong said coldly. Hearing this, the woman gave a slight smile. Yes, a young body is indeed delightful. It wasn't a waste of my effort. However, no sooner had she spoken than Chiron's body began to show bulging veins. Blue Spirit was instantly enraged. Damn, it looks like this body won't last much longer. But quickly, Blue Spirit's tone shifted, and she glanced at Go-chan on the ground with a sly smile. Didn't expect him to die just like that, but he seems to have no regrets, so it looks like he won't become a vengeful spirit. Hearing this, Jong kept his gaze fixed on Go-chan, his mouth twitching as he murmured, according to the 6-person spirit summoning technique, vengeful spirits are born from strong resentment, but if a person dies in a place filled with malice and death chi, they can also be influenced to arise. Blue Spirit was shocked by this statement, seeming to guess what was coming. At that moment, Jong's hand movements changed continuously. The death chi around him began to spread, and then flowed into Go-chan's body through his palms. Gradually, Go-chan's soul emerged as streaks of light from his body, eventually condensing into a faint orb of light. At that moment, a red line swiftly connected to the orb. This scene made Blue Spirit's eyes widen. He had actually used the death chi to extract Go-chan's soul and establish a connection with it. However, Go-chan's soul is still too weak. If we don't find a vessel quickly, it will dissipate completely. But where can we find a body in such a short time? Blue Spirit said anxiously. Jong did not respond, just looked coldly at Blue Spirit. Seeing Jong's expression, Blue Spirit felt uneasy, realizing that something bad was about to happen. At this moment, Go-chan's soul felt as if it had plunged into a vast ocean. He could feel his consciousness gradually fading, but he had no complaints. He had no regrets in his life, and it was time for everything to end. But just then, a familiar voice suddenly rang out near his ear. When he violently opened his eyes, his consciousness was still intact. Sure enough, he saw that familiar figure again. He didn't understand what was happening, why he was still alive. Jong's expression remained neutral, signaling Go-chan to calm down, then slowly explained, in order to preserve your soul, I transferred the death chi to your body, so you have now become my familiar. However, your soul energy is very weak and could dissipate at any moment. I had no other choice. Go-chan was still confused, wanting to ask when his own voice startled him. Jong continued, there's only one usable body here, so I put you into that assassin's body. Hearing this, Go-chan completely lost his composure. He looked down at his chest that kept rising and falling. What on earth was going on? In the end, he had turned into a woman. Seeing his current appearance, Go-chan let out a cry of shock and kept pleading with Jong to change him back, complaining that this woman's figure was simply too much. To this, Jong just coldly continued to fix the door, completely ignoring him. If I pull you out, you would disappear immediately. Moreover, even if I did that, this female assassin's body has already become an empty shell. Go-chan's mind was in total disarray, unsure of what to do. Putting aside the fact that he had turned into a woman, if the Flying Death School found out their master had died here, there would indeed be no good days ahead. Just as he was feeling utterly distraught, stressed, a ghostly voice came from behind. You should be thankful to have received this body. I can't even possess it yet. Hearing the voice, Go-chan turned his head and was so startled by Blue Spirit's figure that he shouted out loud. Although Go-chan didn't know who the other was, even now that he had become a spirit, he could clearly feel the huge gap between them. Just one look gave him the illusion of being in a sea of blood. At that moment, he couldn't help but look at Jong beside him, wondering if he had always been in the company of such beings. Go-chan was becoming increasingly puzzled by this young man. Seeing Go-chan's ghostly expression, Blue Spirit comforted him. Don't be sad. After all, you still have a body to use. However, Go-chan looked utterly dejected. But I am a man. This really annoyed Blue Spirit. Really, you get a bargain and still complain. Why are you still thinking like a mortal? Shouldn't you be happy that you've gone from being second-rate to master level? As soon as these words fell, Jong's voice came. Why not give it a try? With that, he harshly kicked at Go-chan's head. Without thinking, purely on instinct, Go-chan bent down and dodged it. Feeling the robust internal force within him, Go-chan only then realized this is what it feels like to be at a master level. Are you satisfied now? Blue Spirit asked. Go-chan still looked aggrieved. But I am still a man. Blue Spirit listened and chuckled meaningfully. Isn't that just perfect? When no one is around, you can touch all you want. Go-chan's face turned bright red. He was a gentleman. How could he possibly do such a thing? Seeing Go-chan's righteous indignation, Jong assured him, if I have the chance in the future, I will definitely find you a suitable body again. Just then, urgent knocking suddenly came from outside the door. The inner chamber's guard came panting. The hallmaster has awakened. Hearing this, everyone was shocked. The scene shifts to the outside of Mock Sword Manor, where a man in a blue Taoist robe stands not far away. He pointed towards a certain direction in the sky, then closed his eyes and muttered. Soon, he furrowed his brow and opened his eyes. Just now, through a secret method, I discovered that the entire villa seems to be enveloped in a red haze of blood chi. It's a kind of ghost realm barrier that immediately captures anyone who approaches. Thinking of this, Gu turned his head to look at the villa entrance. At this time, a drunken young man was being helped into the villa by two courtesans. He was Mok Yango, the eldest son of Mock Sword Manor. Seeing the newcomer, the guard hurriedly approached to report, eldest young master, the master has awakened. The other sons had already been notified to go to the master's room, not far away. Hearing this news, Gu's expression tightened. This was his chance to act, thinking he'll have to go to the hallmaster, so if I separate that azure ghost spirit from him using my familiar, Gu Diao, I can kill him when he's all alone. Meanwhile, hearing that the master has awakened, Jong is momentarily stunned, but he still puts on a relieved expression. That's great, father has finally woken up. Inside, however, Jong breaks out in a cold sweat. He has always felt that competing for the position of heir would be troublesome, so he had planned to leave here after learning the basic techniques. But unexpectedly, the master woke up at this time, which now complicates his ability to leave smoothly. The guard tells him that the master has summoned everyone to the bedroom to make an announcement. Jong knows that there's no way to delay meeting the master any longer. Thus, he follows the guard to head towards the bedroom, with Go-chan subconsciously following behind. Fortunately, Jong turns to him and says, Guard Go-chae Rin, I'll leave you to clean the mess. Hearing this name, Go-chan shudders. He suddenly remembers that his own body hasn't been dealt with yet, and he can only nod silently. Blue Spirit naturally follows Jong. After they leave, Go-chan becomes troubled again, not expecting that in the end, he would have to deal with his own body. However, his face soon turns red. He looks down at his heaving chest. Having never experienced this weight as a man, his feelings strangely begin to shift. Thinking about Ha-Charon's enchanting figure, Go-chan falls into complex emotions. She is indeed beautiful, and suddenly Go-chan's mood becomes somewhat heavy. He starts looking around to make sure no one is nearby. He has died and come back to life, and is now a woman. So, he stealthily closes the door, thinking about checking his body while no one is around. But just as he is about to take off his clothes, Blue Spirit's figure silently passes through the window. Instantly, Go-chan freezes like an ice sculpture, but Blue Spirit just mutters something and then disappears again. Seeing this, Go-chan wishes he could just bury himself. I was just trying to change into something more comfortable to move in, he says helplessly to himself. Meanwhile, Blue Spirit has already returned to Jong's side. On their way to the hall, Jong unexpectedly encounters Mok Yu-chan. Compared to 4 days ago, Mok Yu-chan's complexion appears somewhat darkened. Although he hasn't gone mad from disrupted chi, the darkening of his complexion indicates he hasn't been having a good time. Upon seeing Jong, Mok Yu-chan walks over angrily, quietly demanding if Jong had tried the contents of the secret manual. Jong feigns ignorance, deliberately raising his voice. Are you talking about the secret manual? He purposely raises his voice, startling Mok Yu-chan so much that his anger is immediately halved. Don't speak so loudly, just answer my question. Was there any problem? Jong answered, faking innocent. Hearing this, Mok Yu-chan narrows his eyes, staring intensely at Jong. He thinks to himself, it's impossible he hasn't practiced in advance. Even if not for the sake of competing for the master's position, any martial artist, out of curiosity, would surely practice such peerless martial arts. Why are you unharmed then? Mok Yu-chan finally can't help but ask. If this guy had recited the correct secret manual, then the problem must be with himself. Mok Yu-chan has to admit that perhaps he hasn't fully grasped grasp the true essence of the secret manual. This left Blue Spirit speechless. Indeed, this guy was as wicked as ever. However, just then, Blue Spirit suddenly sensed something. She looked up towards a certain direction, showing a curious expression. Jong looked at her in surprise, and Blue Spirit whispered, "Seems like a bug has sneaked in. I wonder who gave him the guts to step into my territory without any hesitation. Looks like I need to entertain him properly." Hearing this, Jong immediately understood that someone from the Phoenix Pavilion had arrived. "I'll be leaving," Blue Spirit announces as she passes through the wall. Then Jong and Mak Yuchan proceed to go to the master's room. The scene switches to the master's room, where Mak Yango and Mak Yunpiang had already arrived ahead of time, and now the family's lineage was all gathered here. Seeing Jong and Mak Yuchan arrive together, Mak Yunpiang felt quite puzzled. When had their relationship become so good? At this moment, although Mak Yango had used his chi to push back some of the drunkenness, his body still reeked of alcohol. Lady Suk was busy wiping him down, but her heart was already filled with unease. This old man waking up and gathering his sons around him was surely to announce the issue of the year. This is bad, thought the lady anxiously. Her own son, Mak Yango, who only knew indulgence in pleasures, had the least chance of becoming the heir. So, no matter whom the master chose as his successor, the situation would be very unfavorable for her and Mak Yango. A moment later, the four stood side by side in front of the master's bedroom. Although each displayed a nervous demeanor, each harbored their own schemes. All four together greeted their father. "Father, congratulations on your recovery. I offer my respectful greetings," they said simultaneously. Suddenly, a tremendous surge of chi burst from Mak Inden. Jong had heard from Guard Cam that his martial arts had reached the pinnacle, but he had not felt it strongly until now. Standing before Mak Inden, he truly felt the intimidating power of this level. However, Jong also harbored a doubt. How could such a formidable master like Mak Inden have been cursed? Just as he pondered this for a moment, Jong's gaze was fixed on Mak Inden. Then, carefully thought, just what sort of being was able to send death to such a figure? The scene shifts to a residence of the Outer Guards near Mak Sword Manor, where the house was already strewn with corpses. In the darkness, two figures casually scanned the surroundings. A tall man pulled out an object the size of a finger from his pocket, on which was clearly written Mak Inden. This old man actually escaped from the curse. How did he manage it? The tall man asked in a low voice. The mysterious person beside him slowly spoke. "I heard the cry of a gudiao earlier. It is a familiar of the witch doctors from Mount Luwu." Hearing this, the burly man laughed heartily. "I thought so. Since a Taoist master intervened, it must be that person who saved Mak Inden from death." As he spoke, he turned his head to look at the barely alive guard on the ground, sneering. "It seems I need to meet this master of Mak Sword Manor myself." With a flash of cold light, the guard also followed the fate of the others. Meanwhile, several figures appeared outside the house and quickly headed towards Mak Sword Manor. Back to the hallmaster's room. Compared to his brothers, Jong appeared exceptionally relaxed, showing no sign of tension. Mak Inden slowly began. "Do you know why I called you all here?" Everyone knew the answer but kept silent, afraid to respond. Only Jong casually said, "Isn't it to decide the matter of the successor?" As soon as these words came out, everyone showed a look of surprise. They had not expected him to speak so directly. As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere in the room instantly tensed. Everyone's feelings became complex. Mak Inden was also a bit surprised. Upon waking, he had learned of the events that had transpired during his illness from the head of the inner hall, especially hearing that the third son had saved him. At first, he thought this was either a coincidence or a setup by the third son, but from the performance just now, it seemed that the third son might have truly changed. Jong wasn't thinking much about it. He had no interest in the position of the master. He was relaxed merely to go along with the atmosphere of the scene. However, Mak Inden smiled meaningfully and then announced that the successor would be decided through a test. As the room fell into a brief silence, Jong suddenly spoke up. "I do not plan to participate in the test." His words exploded like a bomb in the room, shocking everyone present. Everyone's expressions became incredibly animated. Mak Yunpiang and Mak Yango looked at him with disbelief. Even the master asked in surprise, "Why do you not plan to participate in the test?" "It's because compared to my brothers, I have many shortcomings, so I don't think I qualify to be the heir." At this, Mak Yunpiang smirked. Although he didn't know what the third son was plotting, if he was willing to step aside, it would not be a bad thing for him. Then, Mak Inden asked again, "Why do you think you are not qualified?" Faced with the master's repeated questioning, Jong also felt surprised. As far as he knew, the master had always been very disappointed with the eldest and the third sons, so their failure in the test should not have been significant. Now the master's interest in his withdrawal seemed to suggest that an excuse was needed. Thinking this, Jong immediately responded, "As the future master of Mak Sword Manor, one must possess outstanding abilities in both martial arts and wisdom. I lack in both aspects, so I give up my eligibility to become the master." Upon hearing this, Mak Inden burst out laughing, but as he laughed, his gaze gradually became sharp, looking at Jong, thinking, "It seems he really has changed. He indeed didn't save me for the position of the master." Seeing a third son who has no desire for recognition start to reflect on himself and give up the position of the master for the prosperity of Mak Sword Manor is indeed gratifying. Mak Inden felt very reassured. You are fully qualified to be the heir. As he spoke, the master slowly removed his clothes. However, when everyone saw the master's severed right arm, all were shocked, and Zhang's complexion changed drastically. At this moment inside Mok Sword Manor, Mok Inden was telling his sons about how Mok Jiangwon had saved him. Everyone was uneasy, having heard about an accident a few days ago but unaware that the master's arm had been chopped off, and they broke out in cold sweat. Different from them, at this moment, Zhang was plunged into deep memories. Scenes of his grandfather's death surfaced in his mind, and he vividly remembered the scar-like mark on his grandfather's body. After he was captured, he too was marked with the same symbol. This was the mark he had desperately sought, and now it appeared on Mok Inden. I finally found you. To find the murderer of his grandfather, Zhang transformed into the murderous scythe ghost. However, after being captured, a scar-like mark was carved on his body. Fortunately surviving, he changed his identity and became the third son of Mok Sword Manor. Now, seeing the same mark on Mok Inden's waist, he smiled. He had not expected to find the very thing he had been searching for all this time. Here, as he pondered his next move, his brow suddenly furrowed, and his eyes involuntarily drifted towards the door. Mok Inden, seeing this, felt surprised and was about to ask what was happening when his gaze also sharpened, and he abruptly stood up from his seat, startling the others. At that moment, faint noises came from outside, and a guard burst through the door. Not good, master. We're under attack. The scene shifts to numerous assassins battling with the guards of Mok Sword Manor. Faced with powerful enemies, they could only struggle desperately, placing all their hopes on the master arriving in time. However, under the leadership of the leading man, wherever they went, corpses were left in their wake. At this time, he walked unhurriedly to the front gate of Mok Sword Manor, his formidable chi bursting forth from him. With a swing of his sword, the great gate was instantly blasted into dust. This sight chilled the guards on sight, but they had no time for surprise as the attackers had already begun their assault. Elsewhere, a figure was hidden in a corner watching all this. The previously infiltrating Grandmaster Gu. He was nervously chanting an invisibility spell. During the chant, no one could detect his presence, but the downside was he couldn't move and had to keep chanting. He avoided the assassin's sight with his invisibility spell, but this put him in an awkward position. His body was soaked with sweat as he continuously surveyed his surroundings, staying alert. His Gu Diao was being used to divert Blue Spirit's attention, and in this situation, there was no way he could kill Mok Jiangwon. At this moment, he began to regret his actions. However, as long as he could hold out until these people left, at least he wouldn't be caught. However, just then, the appearance of a mysterious figure filled him with dread. This person emitted an unusual aura. Grandmaster Gu could tell at a glance that this was a characteristic of someone who had long practiced sorcery. But what terrified him more was that the mysterious person kept forming various seals with his hands, apparently some sort of tracking spell. Someone capable of casting such a spell must be at least a master-level sorcerer. Just as Grandmaster Gu felt the situation was dire, he heard the mysterious person utter the word release, and the space around him began to distort, and his invisibility spell was forcefully broken. In the next second, the mysterious person appeared before him, grabbing his throat. You are the one who lifted the curse from Mok Inden, aren't you? Hearing this, Grandmaster Gu panicked. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding, but the mysterious person wasn't interested in listening to explanations. Daring to interfere with the actions of the underworld assassin pavilion, you should be prepared to die. With that, he tightened his grip, and blood blisters surged on Grandmaster Gu's head, which burst in the next second. Seeing the situation, the leading man quickly guessed his intentions. It seems the master of that Gu Diao has been dealt with by you. We need to hurry and find that item. Hearing this, the mysterious person pulled out another tracking charm. It's time to retrieve our treasure from Mok Inden. At this moment, the sound of clashing weapons echoed throughout Mok Sword Manor, turning what was just a tranquil courtyard into a battlefield. Mok Inden, not adept with his left hand, drew his long sword and shouted, "Who dares to breach Mok Sword Manor? It seems you are prepared to die." Seeing the master who had been bedridden for a long time suddenly appear, the warriors cheered, boosting their morale instantly. Mok Inden bellowed, "Follow me." The warriors echoed his command, and Mok's brothers followed him closely. Not everyone was so motivated, however. At that moment, Zhang was merely following behind superficially, taking advantage of the chaos as everyone fought the attackers. He quietly turned away, hiding in a less crowded area. Although unclear about what was happening, the lives and deaths here had nothing to do with him. He saw no reason to defend this place. He was only concerned about one thing, the scar-like mark. He had planned to leave after figuring things out, but the sudden crisis forced him to leave earlier. After all, in such turmoil, the disappearance of one or two people wouldn't be strange. However, just as he turned around, a strange feeling surged through him. At that moment, streams of dark energy began gathering into his palms. Just as he was distracted, an assassin launched a surprise attack on him. Yet, Zhang merely raised his hand lightly to block the attack, his palm swiftly rotating, and the next second it seamlessly entered the assassin's body. As the assassin's life faded, a dark energy emanated from his body. Just as I thought, this dark energy is indeed the death chi of a deceased person. Subsequently, Zhang closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and quickly felt the death chi around him increase rapidly. Apparently, many had died in a short time. Such an opportunity was rare, so he couldn't afford to waste it. However, with masked individuals everywhere, trying to absorb death chi here could be dangerous. Just then, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. It was Go-chan, occupying the body of Ha-Chiron. Just now, he had been attacked by a group while changing clothes, and after dealing with them, he hurriedly found Jong. Jong said with a smile, "You've come at the right time. I need you to protect me for a while." Saying this, he sat down cross-legged and began using a breathing technique to absorb the swirling death chi. Seeing this, Go-chan was speechless. This guy's got some nerve, trying to cultivate chi on a battlefield. Isn't that akin to courting death? But quickly, he seemed to understand Jong's intention. Jong wasn't cultivating chi, but absorbing death chi. Although Go-chan was a ghost spirit occupying Ha-Chiron's body, he could clearly see the death chi from all around being absorbed into Jong's body. At this moment, Jong felt the death chi continuously filling him, produced by dozens of deceased individuals. Not only was it dense, but it was also extremely pure, containing the dark emotions of everyone's moment of death. Compared to the death chi absorbed before, the quantity this time was at least 3 times more, far exceeding Jong's expectations. However, unbeknownst to him, as he focused on his breathing technique, Go-chan was under immense stress. With more and more masked individuals converging, even he, with his peak level strength, was caught in a tough fight. At that moment, Go-chan suddenly wished that the terrifying ghost woman would come to support him. Just then, a figure appeared. It was the head of the outer hall, Sang Woongbik. Seeing the figure, Go-chan finally breathed a sigh of relief. He had learned from Jong that Sang Woongbik also had a ghost spirit within him. He excitedly called out Demon Monk, but after shouting for a while, Sang Woongbik remained unresponsive. Just when Go-chan was puzzled, a blood shadow flashed, and Sang Woongbik's body was brutally split in half. At the same time, a scarred man slowly emerged, turning his gaze toward the cultivating Mok Jaewoon with interest. What an interesting kid, daring to cultivate right under the enemy's nose. Seeing the man at that moment, Go-chan knew trouble was brewing. The man's strength was beyond his imagination, and even he, at peak level, couldn't help but tremble. The scarred man turned his gaze to Jong, intrigued. The outside is already a river of blood, yet this kid is still engrossed in his cultivation. How interesting. Saying that, he strode towards Jong, closing the distance with each step he took. Seeing this scene, Go-chan was so frightened that he hurriedly called Jong's name, but at this moment, Jong was already lost in a state of self-forgetfulness. The death chi around him surged into his body like a tidal wave, making it nearly impossible to wake him at this time. Moreover, forcibly interrupting him could likely cause him to go into a frenzy. Realizing this, Go-chan trembled inwardly, but quickly gathered his spirits. Faced with the monster before him, he felt somewhat helpless, yet he could not just sit by and wait for death. Go-chan steeled his heart, knowing he couldn't stop the opponent, but even if it meant his flesh was destroyed, he would fight to buy more time for the young master. The next second, he leapt up, instantly appearing above the man's head, moving with the speed of lightning. At that moment, the unique martial skill Flying Assassin Technique Third Form, Silent Defeat, instinctively unfolded in him. However, the man remained unmoved, not even assuming a defensive posture, and said lightly, "You are indeed fast, but still too slow." Before the words fell, a sharp sword shadow appeared out of thin air, swiftly slashing towards him. Go-chan reacted in time, swiftly flipping his body, and his severed hair flew about. A moment later and his body would have been split in two. The battle was not over yet. Go-chan took advantage of the man's momentary recovery to shoot 3 spirit knife flying needles at him. In an instant, his figure appeared in front of Go-chan, casually flicking, sending Go-chan flying backward like a cannonball. This was the difference in strength. That man was too powerful, with just one strike putting Go-chan on the verge of death. He shakily stood up, trying to prevent the man from getting closer to Mok Jaewoon, but his body could no longer exert any strength properly. At that moment, the man ominously warned, "If you interfere with me again, you're dead." With that, he raised his hand toward Jong's head. However, as his hand was about to touch Jong, the man clenched his teeth, swung his massive blade, and slashed towards Jong. Just then, with a clang, a figure blocked the man's sword. It was the master of Mok Sword Manor, Mok Inden. Immediately afterward, a fierce battle between the two erupted, the sound of sword and knife colliding resonating in the air. A battle between two masters caused a violent wind around them, but there was still a huge gap between them. After a fierce strike, Mok Inden was sent flying back several meters, and a stream of black blood flowed from his mouth. He had just awoken from his sickbed, and with his right hand gone, his strength was not even half of what it was at its peak. However, he still glanced at Mok Jaewoon, who was meditating nearby, and seeing that he was unharmed, he turned his attention back to the man. Mok Inden questioned why the man attacked Mok Sword Manor. Hearing this, the man laughed heartily and then reached out his hand. "Manor Master Mok, I'll just say this once. If you don't want Mok Sword Manor to turn into ruins, you'd better hand over what you stole willingly." Hearing this, Mok Inden's expression instantly stiffened. "The treasure you stole from us." The scene shifts outside Mok Sword Manor, where Blue Spirit is lost in thought. She had thought the Gudiao had entered her territory to lure her out, but it unexpectedly died. This means that its master has lost his life at this moment. But no ordinary person could kill a master of sorcery that quickly, which means a very dangerous presence must have emerged in the villa. Soon after, inside Mocksword Manor, where the fire had already died down, everyone gathered in the central square. At that moment, Jong finally opened his eyes, saw the wreckage around him, and was confused. He turned his head to the central square. The villa's guards knelt on the ground, already without the power to resist, while the master, Mock-Inden, was facing off against that burly man, with very different expressions on their faces. To this, Jong seemed indifferent. No wonder the death chi is thinning. It seems the fight is over. What a pity. Thinking this, he slowly walked over to Go-chan and asked in a low voice, "What's going on?" Seeing that Jong had finally awakened, Go-chan looked embarrassed and unsure of how to explain, so he recounted what had happened. Originally, when Mock-Inden confronted the man at the first moment, he guessed the man's identity. "It seems you are from the Heaven-Earth Association, right?" Hearing this, the man just chuckled. Mock-Inden sighed deeply and then announced his surrender to the man, letting all the guards give up resistance. "I will return that thing to you, but as a condition, I hope you can spare Mocksword Manor." Hearing this, the man showed a hint of regret. "It seems I spoke too soon. It would have been good to see you struggle a bit more." With that, the man laughed heartily and then spoke, "I swear on my honor as one of the 5 kings of the Heaven-Earth Association, the King of Brilliance Sun Yun, your request is granted." Go-chan, hearing the names Heaven-Earth Association and Sun Yun, widened his eyes. Hearing this, Jong asked Go-chan to explain further what the Heaven-Earth Association is. "It is a very dangerous organization," Go-chan continued. "The Heaven-Earth Association, one of the 3 major powers currently dividing the martial arts world in Zhongyuan's Murim, venerates strength and aims to unify the martial arts world. They had once caused rivers of blood in the martial world. Thus, the name Heaven-Earth Association strikes fear in the martial arts community." Regarding Mocksword Manor, although it is definitely a large clan, compared to Heaven-Earth Association, it is merely a minor player. And that man over there is one of the 5 great kings of the Heaven-Earth Association, the King of Brilliance, Sun Yun. His strength and the power he wielded were enough to terrify countless people. If a real fight were to break out, Mocksword Manor would likely face annihilation. In the end, the Manor Master, Mock-Inden, had no choice but to hand over the treasure. However, the treasure they are after is stored in the secret chamber beneath the medicinal hall. Indeed, they were searching for that very book of human skin. When hearing that the item Heaven-Earth Association was looking for was in the secret chamber beneath the medicinal hall, Jong quickly guessed what they wanted. They were indeed looking for the book of human skin. At this time, although Go-chan was unclear about the specific item they were after, he suspected it was likely on Jong. Therefore, once Jong awoke, he continuously warned him to be cautious of Heaven-Earth Association and to avoid stirring up trouble. However, in the next second, he saw Jong walking straight towards Mock-Inden, nearly causing Go-chan's soul to fly out of fright. At this moment, Mock-Inden also noticed that Jong had awoken. Mock-Inden first asked Jong if he was injured and admonished him not to take such risks again, then asked him to rest aside. However, Jong directly asked, "How did you get the scar on your body?" Mock-Inden initially thought that the third son was concerned about him, but after thinking it over, he realized Jong hadn't sustained any external injuries, which puzzled him. Jong continued to press, "Who caused that scar on your waist?" Hearing Mock Jae-won's question, Mock-Inden frowned. Given the current situation, why would Jong suddenly ask about this? Just then, the masked men who had gone to retrieve the treasure from the medicinal hall's basement returned. They knelt before Sun Yun, respectfully presenting the wooden box that originally contained the book of human skin. Although the seal charms on the surface of the box were gone, it appeared intact. Sun Yun was overjoyed at the sight, and Mock-Inden seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Now is not the time to discuss this. I will tell you later." However, Jong insisted, "You must tell me now." Mock-Inden didn't answer, just silently watched as Sun Yun slowly opened the treasure box. At this moment, Sun Yun was immersed in the joy of having recovered the treasure, unaware of the mischievous smile that had appeared on Jong's face. "If you don't speak up, there could be big trouble," Jong whispered quietly. Mock-Inden looked at Jong puzzledly, but what Jong said next made him visibly shocked. "What they want isn't underneath the medicinal hall." At this moment, as Sun Yun saw the contents of the box, his face suddenly changed. A tremendous internal force burst from him, causing the air around to buzz. He then looked at Mock-Inden with a murderous gaze, a moment that struck fear into the hearts of the Mock family. However, at this moment, Lady Sook sneered. She thought, "It seems they didn't find what they were looking for, and since Mock Jae-won has obtained a secret manual of Mocksword Manor, that thing is probably on him." She quietly calculated that if she could expose this, she could use these people to eliminate Mock Jae-won. However, the next developments shattered her illusions. At this moment, Sun Yun pulled a pair of earrings from the box. These earrings, made of gold, silver, and jade, were clearly valuable and could only be worn by someone of high status. Indeed, they were the very earrings that Mock-Inden had personally given to his wife on their anniversary. The lady felt a sense of doom and turned her fierce gaze towards Mock Jae-won. "You dare." Before she could finish, Jong smirked devilishly and loudly said, "Aren't these earrings the lady's most cherished items?" As soon as these words came out, Mock-Inden was shocked, and the lady was utterly flustered. Mock-Inden, seeing this, tried to stop Jong from continuing, but Jong kept shouting, "Why are you playing dumb, madam? Madam, under these circumstances, are you still still going to pretend you don't know? I know for sure that those are yours. Sun Yun sneered coldly and crushed the earrings in his hand. You have chosen to bring on your own downfall. Sun Yun then glared at the trembling lady. At this moment, Lady Suk was panicked and staggered back a few steps, quickly explaining, Sir, this must be a misunderstanding. Think about it. If I had stolen something, why would I put my own jewelry in there? This must be someone else's setup. But Sun Yun didn't listen to her explanation, lifting his huge sword and swinging it towards Lady Suk's head. Just then, Mok Inden used all his strength to block the sword with his own, only to hear a clang as his treasured sword was bent and deformed by the strike, and he himself was flung away by the immense force. At this moment, looking at Mok Inden lying on the ground, Sun Yun coldly said, Since none of you know where that item is, it means I won't lose anything from killing you. Saying this, Sun Yun approached the kneeling mock guards and scoffed, Not only did you steal the treasure of the Heaven-Earth Association, but you also dared to mock us. With that, he smashed the kneeling guard in front with his sword. This is absolutely intolerable. Seeing this, Zhang whispered to Mok Inden, Can you tell me now? Mok Inden responded, Didn't I say I would definitely tell you later? Zhang coldly smiled. That's not how you negotiate. At this moment, Sun Yun had started a killing spree, cutting down the guards one by one. Do you intend to let everyone here die? Mok Inden shouted. Zhang coldly said, You're making me repeat myself. I guess you'll tell me once the situation is worse. However, just then, a voice suddenly said, Sir, I have something to report. The speaker was Lady Suk's personal guard, Hoan. She pointed towards Mok Yunpyeong and Mok Yuchun, slowly saying, As the Lady of the Master, if something happens to her, it would jeopardize the position of her eldest son, and these people could benefit from it, even taking over the Master's position. They must be the culprits. Instantly, everyone's gaze shifted to Mok Yunpyeong and others. However, Hoang's next words shocked them even more. The place where the treasure was stored also contained the secret manual of Mok Sword Manor. They must have taken the scriptures and then stolen the treasure. Hearing this, Zhang secretly smiled, as all this was part of his plan. Previously, he had given the scriptures to Mok Yunpyeong and Mok Yuchun precisely for this moment. Hoang's accusation was also part of his arrangement, as the demon monk had long possessed Hoang. Mok Yunpyeong, panicked, shouted, What are you talking about? Mok Yuchun also vehemently denied it, claiming he would never do such a thing. However, Zhang remained silently on the side. Their panic successfully caught Sun Yun's attention, and he coldly said, The ones who just shouted in protest, drag them away and skin them. Hearing this, Mok Inden finally realized the severity of the situation. Turning to look at Zhang, who seemed just to be enjoying the show, shaking all over, he hysterically said, The person who put that scar on me is Phantom Sword from the 6 heavens and 8 stars. Are you satisfied now? Hearing this name, Zhang smiled faintly, finally having a lead on that person. But just then, Zhang's expression changed abruptly as a bell rang through the entire villa, and the demon monk possessing Hoang let out a painful scream. At the same time, the mysterious sorcerer slowly appeared. Seeing his figure, Zhang had only one thought, this person is extremely dangerous. Zhang's secret was about to be revealed. As the bell continued to ring, a sorcerer wearing a hat and holding a staff slowly appeared, instantly attracting everyone's attention. Sun Yun softly called out, Shaman Cho. Seeing this figure, Zhang also deeply felt the danger. However, before he could react, Shaman Cho murmured, Who is causing trouble here? I shall exorcise you. He then waved his staff rapidly, formed a seal with his left hand, and chanted, sending an invisible energy spreading around. As the energy touched Hoang, she clutched her head in agony, her neck veins bulging out, emitting a ghastly black air. Seeing this, everyone stepped back in fear. At that moment, although Go Chan did not suffer as Hoang did, his chest also felt uncomfortable. As the energy wave reached him, he quickly circulated his chi, barely preventing his soul from being stripped from his body. As the demon monk was forcibly extracted, Shaman Cho accelerated his movements, determined to completely destroy the demon monk. Just then, a flying sword shot towards Shaman Cho, interrupting his spellcasting. Simultaneously, a masked person appeared rapidly, blocking the deadly strike for Shaman Cho. The person who threw the sword was Zhang. Despicable and shameless. How dare you attack by surprise? The masked person shouted angrily, then prepared to attack Zhang. However, Shaman Cho stopped him, frowning deeply and staring at Zhang, asking, Can you also see spirits? As soon as he said this, the surrounding people became restless. At this moment, Zhang tensed up. At the moment he threw the flying sword, he hadn't thought much, just feeling that losing the demon monk was too regrettable. Now coming to his senses, he realized his actions had been somewhat reckless. I don't know what you're talking about. However, this expression did not escape Shaman Cho's eyes. Shaman Cho muttered to himself, You don't know? Then I guess I can get rid of this ominous thing. Demon monk screamed from pain. The people here won't have any idea what we're doing. Zhang stayed silent. In this world, few can become martial arts geniuses, but even fewer can become shaman because these individuals are born with talents that are extraordinary. The best quality a shaman can be born with is the eyes. You can just train the other qualities, but you cannot train to see. In other words, if Zhang could indeed see spirits, it would mean he was naturally gifted to be a shaman. After hearing Shaman Cho's words, Zhang was secretly astonished but chose to remain silent. Seeing that Zhang was unwilling to admit it, Shaman Cho's expression changed. changed. Then let me ask you differently. Why did you try to stop me from destroying the spirit? Shaman Cho then formed a hand seal and summoned the Four Peaks interlocking technique. For streams of light trapped the demon monk tightly, and the space within the formation began to shrink gradually. The demon monk looked around, unable to hide the panic on its face. Shaman Cho said, "Normally, spirits do not obey human commands, but it seems this spirit is following your will. So if you tell me the reason, I will let it go." Knowing he could no longer feign ignorance, Zhang also began to form hand seals, and the seals he made were exactly the same as those of Shaman Cho. Simultaneously, for streams of light also appeared around the demon monk, effectively blocking the shrinking column of light. This scene completely astonished Shaman Cho, even making him suspect Zhang was playing dumb. He was shocked and asked, "How do you know this spell?" Zhang countered, "Must one learn it to use it?" At that moment, Shaman Cho finally confirmed that Zhang was a true genius. To know the Four Peaks interlocking technique required one to be at least a master of the monthly phase to perform, but this young man had mimicked it after just a glance, even adjusting the spell's usage to function within another's formation. Even Shaman Cho himself could not achieve this. It seems that eyes are not your only talent. Thinking this, Shaman Cho laughed heartily, then pointed with one hand and uttered a release word. The light around the demon monk instantly scattered. Then, Shaman Cho turned to King of Brilliance Sun Yun and said, "I don't care about the others, but I want this kid." Instantly, everyone's eyes widened, not understanding why the Heaven-Earth Association suddenly decided to spare Mok Jiangwon. At this moment, Sun Yun coldly said, "What kind of nonsense is this now?" But in the end, he agreed to Shaman Cho's request. "Well, alright, but I'm killing everyone else," Sun Yun nonchalantly said. Upon hearing this, Mok Inden was the first to become unsettled, looking at Mok Jiangwon nervously, wanting to say something but not knowing how to begin. Zhang sighed helplessly. Since he had already promised Mok Inden, he could only keep his word now. He walked up to Sun Yun and interrupted, "What you want is with me." Hearing this, Sun Yun stared furiously at Mok Jiangwon. "If you deceive me again, no matter what Shaman Cho requests, I will definitely chop you into pieces." Facing Sun Yun's threat, Zhang was unafraid, simply pointing at his own head. "I'm sorry, but what you want has already been burned by me. However, I've memorized it all in my mind." Next to him, Mok Inden was even more terrified, originally thinking that if Mok Jiangwon handed over the book, Mok Sword Manor could escape disaster. Unexpectedly, he mocked Sun Yun right to his face. After hearing this, Sun Yun did not get angry but laughed heartily. "Are all the so-called righteous sects a bunch of liars?" Zhang coldly retorted, "Why do you think I am lying?" Sun Yun's face changed dramatically, his eyes filled with murderous intent as he stared at Zhang. "Because what you said is impossible. That book cannot be burned, nor destroyed, as if something is protecting it. You haven't even seen what the treasure book looks like and dare to waste my time here. Since that's the case, I will grant your wish." Saying this, Sun Yun picked up a great sword and coldly said, "Remember not to lie in your next life." A fierce sword aura slashed towards Zhang's neck. However, the next second, a statement from Zhang abruptly stopped the sword in its tracks. The cover did not burn, but the content written in blood inside burns quite easily. Instantly, Sun Yun's face turned pale, unable to believe what Zhang said. This guy had actually seen the book. It's known within the inner circles of the Heaven-Earth Association that the human skin book is written in blood. Sun Yun's body began to tremble uncontrollably. However, at this moment, Sun Yun was still unwilling to believe what Zhang said. Because he had witnessed countless masters being devoured bit by the human skin book, no one could survive after seeing the book. Therefore, he suspected if the other party was not lying, then it must be good luck, having fortuitously survived. Sun Yun, his voice trembling, asked, "Did you really see that book?" Zhang calmly replied, "In this situation, why would I lie to you?" Sun Yun stared at Mok Jiangwon, sweat soaking through his clothes. He couldn't detect any panic in Zhang's eyes. If Zhang was telling the truth, then he could finally report back to that person. But cautiously, he said, "Since you claim to have memorized the content in your mind, prove it to me, whether it's the mantras or techniques." Hearing Sun Yun's words, everyone at Mok Sword Manor looked at Mok Jiangwon with nervous eyes. Knowing he had taken the treasure, everyone felt a strong sense of betrayal, but under the current circumstances, only Mok Jiangwon could save them. At that moment, they all hoped he was telling the truth. At the same time, Zhang also frowned deeply. Although he could deceive Mok Yuchan by altering some of the content as before, after all, the other party was the true owner of the book. If they knew the contents were incorrect, he might be killed because of it. If that's the case, then I'll pick out few sentences to see how he reacts, Zhang thought to himself, preparing to speak. However, the next second, a surge of dark red blood rushed towards him. Looking up, he saw the blood spread like a tide across the entire plaza. Just then, a figure stood on the roof. It was Blue Spirit. Simultaneously, her voice echoed in his mind, "If you dare to reveal a single sentence from inside, you will die." The moment he saw Blue Spirit, Zhang felt something was off. At this moment, she was completely different from usual, radiating towering rage, even giving Zhang the illusion of being in a blood-soaked abyss, capable of devouring everything. This rage turned into a sea of blood, enveloping the entire Mok Sword Manor. In an instant, the entire world seemed frozen by the sea of blood, with Blue Spirit standing under the moonlight, glaring fiercely at the people of the Heaven Heaven Earth Association. This was the first time Jong felt Blue Spirit's purest rage. Although he did not know why she hated these people so much, since Blue Spirit stopped him, she definitely did not want these people to know the contents of the book. Yet, if he didn't speak, he might be killed by Sun Yun. At that moment, Jong couldn't help but furrow his brow. Before he had avenged his grandfather, he did not want to die so easily. But what should he do now? Just then, he heard Blue Spirit's ethereal voice in his ear. Blue Spirit seemed to sense Jong's dilemma and whispered, "Just do as I told you." This made Jong even more puzzled. "Do you mean to tell them the wrong content? Sun Yun and the others should know the contents of the book. If I recite the wrong mantra, I will surely die." Blue Spirit responded indifferently after hearing this. "You just need to trust me. If you die, I won't be spared either." Hearing this, Jong could only sigh softly. On the other side, seeing that Jong had not spoken for a long time, Sun Yun was getting impatient. However, just then, Jong silently walked over to a masked man and snatched the long sword from his hand. The masked man was shocked, thinking Jong was planning to resist to the death, but instead, he just stood there silently, closing his eyes. Meanwhile, Blue Spirit removed the hairpin from her head and started demonstrating techniques with the pin as a sword. Her red garment fluttered like falling petals under the moonlight. Jong followed her movements, wielding the long sword and perfectly reproducing the techniques. As a mantra slipped from his lips, a sharp sword chi spread outward along the blade. The sword techniques demonstrated by Jong had no superfluous movements, and it was evident at a glance that it was a lunar vein sword technique. Not only the people of Mock Sword Manor, but even Sun Yun were stunned on the spot. Who would have thought that a third-rate warrior could execute such perfect sword moves? This not only proved the finesse of the sword techniques, but also showcased Jong's unparalleled martial arts talent. Sun Yun was overjoyed. According to his knowledge, that mantra was part of the lunar vein sword technique, lost for 100 years. However, just as he was about to burst into laughter, the masked people around started stirring. Because Jong began reciting the second move's mantra, Sun Yun felt alarmed and quickly intervened. He knew that if the lunar vein sword technique were made public in this manner, it would cause great trouble. Seeing Sun Yun's tense expression, Jong slowly stopped his movements and smirked, confident that he had won his bet. In his heart, he knew the Human Skin Ancient Book contained no such mantras. Yet, Sun Yun's tense expression seemed to indicate that these were indeed the contents of the Human Skin Ancient Book. For a moment, he wasn't sure which it was, so he asked Sun Yun for confirmation. Sun Yun snapped out of it, realizing he had unconsciously shown a tense expression just now. This made things complicated. This sword technique should absolutely not be known to others under normal circumstances. Therefore, the principle was that he should get the complete manual first, then eliminate the opposition. However, just as Sun Yun was contemplating killing him, Shaman Cho called out to him. Sun Yun understood Shaman Cho was interested in Jong, but he was interested as well. After all, Jong had achieved something that no one in the Heaven Earth Association could, and with his unmatched martial arts talent, he was bound to reach the pinnacle of the martial world. Unfortunately, anyone who knew the contents of the Human Skin Book had to die. As he pondered how to handle the situation, Jong looked at him and then smirked without hesitation, drew the long sword across his own neck. "Are you mad?" This action shocked everyone present. Sun Yun quickly intervened, knocking the sword from Jong's hand in the nick of time. At that moment, only he knew that if he hadn't acted in time, the other would have surely ended his own life. Jong, clutching his profusely bleeding wound, scoffed. "It seems this technique is indeed very precious. Now I know how valuable this is. I wasn't planning on speaking so easily, so feel free to take me with you." Upon hearing this, the room fell silent. Everyone at Mock Sword Manor was stunned, unable to believe that Mock Jaehyun was actually offering to go with the enemy. Wasn't that akin to seeking death? But it seemed to be the best solution under the circumstances. Sun Yun, surprised to hear Jong voluntarily offer to return with him to the Heaven Earth Association, initially paused, but then reasoned it was indeed the best approach. This young fellow could not be coerced or threatened into speaking. He had to be taken back to the Heaven Earth Association for further action. What Sun Yun did not know was that Jong's bold decision was precisely to use these people to escape from Mock Sword Manor. Soon after, the Heaven Earth Association's forces left Mock Sword Manor in a grand procession. Inside the carriage, Jong was bound hand and foot and transported to the Heaven Earth Association's headquarters, along with another person who was also bound and taken away from Mock Sword Manor. Jong was bound in the carriage with Mock Yuchan. Mock Yuchan sighed deeply, puzzled as to why he too was taken hostage. This all began 2 hours earlier. After Mock Jaehyun volunteered to leave with the Heaven Earth Association, Sun Yun struck him, knocking him unconscious. However, Sun Yun didn't leave immediately, but made 2 demands to Mock Inden. After all, since Mock Sword Manor had stolen from the Heaven Earth Association, the matter couldn't be settled lightly. Sun Yun raised his hand and said, "If you refuse my demands, I can destroy Mock Sword Manor right now." The 2 conditions Sun Yun proposed were, first, Mock Sword Manor must close its doors for 10 years and not set foot in the martial world. Second, your heir will be taken as a hostage. Upon hearing this, the second condition made the Mock brothers nervous, especially Mock Yuchan, who was stunned as everyone pointed fingers at him. He didn't expect to be acknowledged as the successor this way. Thus, Mock Yuchan became the hostage. Now, though he wasn't knocked unconscious, he was bound tightly, unable to move, and even had his acupoints sealed to prevent him from using his internal strength. Compared to Mok Jae-woon beside him, his situation was slightly better. At this moment, Mok Yu-chan was filled with regret. He had thought he would have a chance to shine once his father awoke, but now he found himself in such a tragic situation, uncertain of what would happen next. As he pondered, he suddenly heard a slight noise. However, other than him, there was only Mok Jae-woon in the carriage, and with Mok Jae-woon's acupoints sealed, he couldn't be the source of the noise. Who made it? Just as he was puzzled, the blindfold over his eyes was suddenly pulled off, and Mok Yu-chan's eyes widened. It was Mok Jae-woon. How did you? Before he could finish, Jong made a shush gesture. He calmly checked the outside of the carriage and said, "If you answer one thing for me, I'll help you untie these ropes." Mok Yu-chan was curious about what he wanted to ask. Jong looked at him expressionlessly and asked, "Who is the phantom sword of the 6 heavens and 8 stars?" Jong's expression grew serious. "So, phantom sword might be in that place? It's just a rumor, but it's probably true," Mok Yu-chan replied. Jong fell silent. From Mok Yu-chan's words, he learned about phantom sword, but the situation was complicated by the existence of that place. As he contemplated his next move, Blue Spirit's voice came to his ear. "Mortal, it's all taken care of outside." Hearing this, Jong immediately knelt to untie Mok Yu-chan. However, this action startled Mok Yu-chan. "Are you planning to escape? If we do this, Mok Sword Manor will face retaliation again." Jong looked indifferent. "What does that have to do with me? If you don't want to come with me, then stay here." Saying that, he struck Mok Yu-chan's neck, knocking him unconscious. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been so easy to knock him out, but it was possible because Mok Yu-chan's internal strength was sealed. Thinking this, Jong walked out of the carriage without looking back. Outside, the scene was a mess, with Blue Spirit impatiently urging him to leave quickly. However, just as Jong stepped out of the carriage, a strange feeling suddenly washed over him, lasting only a moment but leaving him stunned for a long time. At that moment, Blue Spirit's urging voice came again. Jong stopped hesitating and jumped out of the carriage. He then moved his body and began to circulate death chi. The death chi flowed from his core throughout his body, and in the next second, he sped away like an arrow. In just an instant, he was hundreds of meters away, a speed that could not be compared to ordinary running. Thus, under the moonlight, a shadow swiftly moved through the forest. However, as he ran, Jong noticed something odd. Though it had been only half an hour, he had seen the same scenery multiple times. He stopped and began to observe carefully, which also piqued Blue Spirit's curiosity. Jong pointed at a withered tree nearby. "I've seen this tree 4 times now. It seems we've been going in circles." Hearing Jong's words, Blue Spirit frowned slightly. "Could you be mistaken? If we were caught in some kind of spell, I would have noticed." She waved her hand dismissively. "Maybe you're just too tense. We need to keep moving." She continued forward without looking back, but Jong suddenly called her to stop, suggesting that he might have twisted his ankle due to unfamiliarity with the technique. He proposed taking a break right there. Hearing this, Blue Spirit visibly became annoyed. "At your pace, when will we ever get out? Let me check it for you first." Saying so, she reached out towards Jong's ankle. As Blue Spirit bent down, Jong suddenly grasped her neck tightly. "Who exactly are you?" Blue Spirit struggled, shouting, "Mortal, have you lost your mind? Let go of me." Jong coldly said, "If you were really Blue Spirit, you would have pushed me away by now." As he tightened his grip, Blue Spirit's body began to crumble bit by bit. Jong scoffed, "If you want to impersonate someone, you should at least make it believable." As he spoke, a crackling sound was heard, and Blue Spirit's body turned into a puppet. Seeing this, Jong brought his hands together and closed his eyes, chanting a spell. A wave of invisible death chi spread around him. Suddenly, the entire space began to shatter. With a crisp sound, Shaman Cho appeared before Jong. This sudden turn of events startled Shaman Cho. Knowing that the Willow Spirit training technique was a high-level spell that could turn a willow doll into a trusted figure, he was astonished that it had been uncovered by this young man in less than half an hour. Such a talented individual was truly once in a lifetime. Shaman Cho's lips curled up slightly, and he directly said, "Become my disciple." Hearing Shaman Cho's offer to take him as a disciple, Jong's gaze sharpened, yet he remained cautious and surveyed his surroundings. Though he saw no one else, Shaman Cho was only 10 steps away from him, a distance Jong was confident he could easily manage. Just as he was about to make a move, he sensed something unusual, the same feeling he had when he first stepped down from the carriage. At that moment, a strange bloodstain appeared on Jong's cheek, and runes emerged around him. Shaman Cho smiled coldly. "Did you think you could attack me because there's no one around? I have set up barriers around us. If you try to escape, your body might be torn to pieces," Shaman Cho said coldly. "To survive in such a brutal world, you must be fully prepared. That's the first lesson I intend to teach you." Hearing this, Jong was momentarily stunned. "I haven't agreed to be your disciple yet." Shaman Cho was unconcerned but pulled out a puppet and threw it to Jong. The puppet had a seal on it and was connected to Jong by a red thread. It was a puppet sealed with Demon Monk, but Jong could not feel any of Demon Monk's energy from the puppet and wondered how Shaman Cho had managed it. Then, Shaman Cho spoke again. "I'll give you a piece of advice. Since you hold the secrets of the Heaven-Earth Association, your fate now entirely depends on the moods of the high ranks of the association. But if you become my disciple, you will at least have a chance to live." Shaman Cho knew that even even with a sword to his neck, Zhang would still haggle, so he hoped to break him this way. However, Zhang remained composed, staring intently at the puppet in his hand. After a moment of contemplation, he decisively agreed. Alright, but I have one condition in return. You must tell me how you sealed Demon Monk. Hearing this, Shaman Cho burst into laughter. Had I known this, I wouldn't have needed to threaten you. He then pulled another object from his belt. This is not difficult for me, as I was planning to teach you anyway. But first, you must take an oath. Zhang took the object Shaman Cho threw to him, furrowing his brows in silence. Zhang looked puzzled. In his hands was a string of black prayer beads. You just need to wear it on your wrist and say, I, Mok Jiangun, the son of Mokinden, will become the disciple of Cho Yugong. Zhang asked doubtfully, what will happen after I say it? Cho Yugong smiled. Once you've taken the oath, you can no longer harm me. After all, I cannot trust someone who has tried to kill me and attempted to escape. Hearing this, Zhang did not hesitate, tucked the puppet into his bosom, and immediately began to take the oath. As soon as the oath was completed, the prayer beads made a crisp sound, and the words curse words appeared. This was the legendary curse retracting bead. Anyone who wears it and takes an oath can neither remove it nor ever disobey the commands of the person they swore to. This was Cho Yugong's scheme. He was someone who needed to control everything. At that moment, Cho Yugong wore a satisfied expression and threw Zhang a book made of cowhide. This is a manual I wrote myself. It contains what you wish to learn. Memorize it all, then return it to me. Saying this, Cho Yugong turned to leave. However, Zhang stopped him just a few steps away. Aren't you going to release me from this spell? Cho Yugong chuckled. That book also contains the method to undo the spell. I'll give you an hour. If you can't figure it out by then, you're really in trouble. With that, he disappeared into the woods without looking back. Zhang snorted softly, smirking to himself. This is indeed interesting. It seems he was planning to teach me these things all along. Just then, a figure lightly descended from the sky, the long-missing blue spirit. She had waited until Cho Yugong was far enough away before daring to reappear. However, Zhang looked at her skeptically and, catching her off guard, made a grab at her body, but Blue Spirit easily dodged. Blue Spirit, visibly annoyed, demanded, what are you trying to do? Zhang, looking somewhat embarrassed, replied, just a little test. In the next second, Blue Spirit burst out laughing, recalling Zhang's comical jumping around in the illusion. But in a blink, she became serious again, curiously asking, why did you take such an oath? That string of beads contains a very strong curse retracting power. Only this way could I get this, he said, looking again at the manual in his hand. Blue Spirit was speechless. Are you really just after this thing? That's not like you at all. The next second, Zhang effortlessly removed the prayer beads from his wrist, surprising Blue Spirit. She frowned and asked, how did you do that? An oath must be taken in one's own name, right? But my real name isn't Mok Jiangun, and my father isn't Mokinden either, so the oath could never take effect. Hearing this, Blue Spirit realized, so are you planning to run away now? At that moment, Zhang smiled faintly. I've changed my mind now. I want to become his disciple. When Blue Spirit heard Zhang say he wanted to become Cho Yugong's disciple, she was completely unsettled. She couldn't understand why Zhang would make such a decision. Do you really want to become a disciple of the Heaven-Earth Association? Zhang did not answer, but a firm look appeared on his face. Instead, he shared what he had learned earlier in the carriage. It turned out that Mok Yuchun told him that as one of the 6 heavens and 8 stars represents the pinnacle of martial arts power today. It is said that 6 of them have transcended human limits, and the remaining 8 possess the strongest combat power among humans. Phantom Sword is one of those 8 stars. Phantom Sword was most famous 17 years ago. Rumors claim that his targets are all highly reputable masters in the martial arts world. People speculate that he must be either a royal family member or a top figure in the Heaven-Earth Association. Therefore, he is very likely to be in the Heaven-Earth Association. That is to say, as long as he goes to the Heaven-Earth Association, he might be able to find the other party. Thus, when Cho Yugong offered to take Zhang as his disciple, he began to plan how to infiltrate the inner workings of the Heaven-Earth Association. After all, being dark under the light would facilitate his search for Phantom Sword. After hearing Zhang's words, Blue Spirit was silent for a long time, then slowly exhaled a puff of green smoke. That's quite coincidental. It seems that from the moment we met, our destinies were already destined. Hearing this, Zhang curiously looked at Blue Spirit, wondering why she suddenly brought this up. However, Blue Spirit looked at him with a determined gaze. Become my disciple, take on my karma, and avenge me. At this moment, Blue Spirit's tone was completely different from usual. Every word she uttered was filled with intense murderous intent. Zhang carefully thought about it. It seemed her anger was always directed at the Heaven-Earth Association. Indeed, she wanted to take revenge on the Heaven-Earth Association. But what puzzled Zhang was why she was so fixated on revenge. Considering your age, shouldn't the object of your revenge have died long ago? Can't such a long time dilute your hatred? Zhang asked, puzzled. Blue Spirit's lips trembled slightly. If it were you, would your hatred diminish over time? At that moment, Zhang fell silent, because in his heart, he harbored thoughts similar to Blue Spirit's. I absolutely cannot forgive that bastard and his descendants living in this world, nor can I forget the humiliation after the truth was concealed. Even if 1,000 years pass and the object of my vengeance has decayed, the anger in my heart will never be erased. Therefore, I must annihilate them, even if it means drenching everything in blood. At this moment, Zhang once again felt the purest anger in Blue Spirit's heart, as if it were transforming into a blood sea that slowly engulfed him, sinking deeper and deeper. Although Zhang understood that this was an illusion of Blue Spirit's anger, he still saw the hatred in the depths of her heart, cold and dark, even after more than 700 years, just like himself, who struggled to live to avenge his grandfather. At that moment, Zhang's thoughts solidified. I understand. I am willing to become your disciple. Blue Spirit was stunned. She did not expect Zhang to agree so quickly and was at a loss for words for a moment. She just silently watched him, and after a long while, she turned her head away pretentiously and muttered, "You should have done so in the first place." Before she could finish her sentence, Zhang spoke again. However, as a condition, you must tell me the reason for your revenge. I don't want to get involved in something I don't understand. Blue Spirit frowned slightly, exhaled a puff of green smoke slowly, and said with a dim expression, "Since that's the case, I will tell you one of the reasons. Originally, the Heaven-Earth Association was formed by 3 divisions, one of which was the Moon Division." Hearing Blue Spirit's words, Zhang seemed to guess something. "It seems that you are a member of the Moon Division." At this moment, Blue Spirit did not deny it. "That's all I can tell you now. What you need to do is inherit the karma of the Moon Division." Hearing this, Zhang silently gazed at Blue Spirit, trying to discern her thoughts from her eyes. However, despite looking for a long time, he was never able to see through her. He was curious about what exactly had happened back then that made Blue Spirit keep silent about it all this time. Finally, Zhang bowed with both hands clasped together and sincerely revealed his own name to Blue Spirit. "My name is Zhang." At this moment, the moonlight shone on Blue Spirit's face as if time had come to a standstill. The breeze fluttered through her sleeves, and Zhang's voice came again. "I will accept my fate and inherit all the karma of the Moon Division and voluntarily become Blue Spirit's disciple." Hearing Zhang's vow, Blue Spirit smiled, a smile so radiant. Perhaps at this moment, she saw a glimpse of hope for her revenge. As fate intertwined, under the moonlight, Zhang made his vow to voluntarily become Blue Spirit's disciple. Seeing Zhang's sincere eyes, Blue Spirit's eyebrows slightly raised, and her heart filled with satisfaction. She slowly exhaled a puff of smoke. "Very well, from now on, you should call me Master." However, this request was quickly rejected by Zhang. He calmly said, "This is my second condition. Let's omit formal titles like Master and Disciple." Blue Spirit was infuriated. "How can you say that? You just called that Taoist Master, so why can't you call me that?" Zhang disdainfully pulled out the wooden doll containing Demon Monk from his chest. "As a spirit, Demon Monk always calls me Master, yet I don't see you calling me Master." At this, Blue Spirit was rendered speechless and could only silently turn her head away, mentally cursing Demon Monk. Seeing this, Zhang just smiled faintly. In fact, if he was to go to the Heaven-Earth Association, he would need to learn the rest of the magic spells from Blue Spirit, so it was only right to call her Master. But regardless, now that his plot had succeeded, he would just leave it at that. Thinking this, he opened the secret book in his hand and began trying to lift the surrounding prohibitions. An hour later, the masked men who had been attracted away started to return one by one. Cho Yugong looked disappointedly towards the northwest forest. He had expected Zhang to lift the prohibitions quickly, but as it was nearing an hour, he inevitably began to doubt whether his demands were too harsh. In reality, an hour was not very long, especially considering the difficulty of mastering specified techniques in such a short time. Moreover, he was still in such a perilous situation. However, Cho Yugong decided to personally go and lift the prohibitions. Just then, Zhang's figure slowly walked out of the forest. The masked men were startled and prepared to subdue him, but Cho Yugong stopped them. Then, Zhang called Cho Yugong Master. Although the masked men were puzzled, they dared not say anything. At this moment, Cho Yugong looked at Zhang in front of him, his eyes filled with surprise, but he kept scolding Zhang for being later than expected. In fact, Zhang's speed was entirely beyond his expectations. Among all the talents Cho Yugong valued, Zhang had the most potential. However, now that Mok Jiangwon had become his disciple, he also decided to refrain from praising him too much, simply agreeing with a brief remark, then letting Zhang return to the cart to rest. As the carriage slowly moved forward, the large troop set off again towards the distance. Back in the carriage, Zhang finally breathed a sigh of relief. At this moment, Mok Yuchun was still lying in the carriage, fast asleep. Zhang's lips curled up slightly, whispering softly, "It seems we haven't been discovered yet." Speaking, a thumb-sized wooden doll emerged from his embrace. The wooden doll spoke. "I never thought I'd have to hide in such a wooden doll." The speaker was Blue Spirit. Unfortunately, due to Blue Spirit's high level, even a slight movement from her would cause the doll to crack. Fortunately, Zhang's masterful control of the technique allowed the doll to remain intact. However, it was indeed uncomfortable for Blue Spirit to be trapped inside. Zhang could only comfort her, promising to find her a suitable body as soon as possible. Originally, to help Blue Spirit conceal her presence, Zhang not only quickly learned the art of prohibition, but also mastered the technique of infusing spirits into dolls with the remaining time. If Cho Yugong knew, he would probably be scared silly with laughter. Zhang then started his long journey to the Heaven-Earth Association. 2 weeks later, various troops gradually converged. At this moment, not far from the forest, a figure watched the direction of the caravan's progress. This person was Ha Chiron, possessed by Go-chan. At this moment he was incredibly conflicted, on one hand lamenting the predicament of becoming a woman and on the other regretting making such a decision. Originally, after Mok Jae-won was taken away by Sun Yoon, Go-chan had been following behind the carriage. Having become Jong's spirit, he had formed a connection with Jong and thus instinctively knew where Mok Jae-won was. In fact, if it weren't for becoming a spirit, this would have been an excellent opportunity to escape from Mok Jae-won. However, the farther he got away, the more anxious he felt in his heart, perhaps because he knew that if Mok Jae-won died, he would disappear too. So, no matter what, if he wanted to remain in this world, he had to help Mok Jae-won survive. But the thought of rescuing someone from the hands of the Heaven-Earth Association immediately made him balk. I can't keep going like this. I have to think of a plan first. As Ha Chiron was a top assassin of the Flying Assassins School, she definitely had experience in infiltration. Go-chan thought that if he could trace her memories, he might discover some infiltration techniques he had never tried before. Just then, an idea popped into Go-chan's mind, and he felt somewhat helpless. It's over. I have to resort to using my beauty. When this thought emerged, a wave of embarrassment swept over him, and it took quite some effort for Go-chan to overcome his rationality and maintain the last bit of his dignity. However, along the way, there was something that greatly puzzled Go-chan. Since the people of the Heaven-Earth Association had already achieved their objective, why didn't they return directly to the Heaven-Earth Association, instead taking detours? Moreover, every 2 days, they would see groups of kids under the age of 20 joining the troops. This situation gave him a vague premonition of something ominous. Jong had also noticed this early on. He had inquired several times with Cho Yugong, but the responses he received were to mind his own business. Therefore, in the following time, he could only stay in the carriage, focusing on studying secret techniques. Until this day, the massive troop of over 300 people, led by Sun Yoon, suddenly stopped. Sun Yoon, visibly excited, shouted toward the front, "This place is still as spectacular as ever." Hearing this, Jong also emerged from the carriage. What entered his sight was a huge city, standing amidst numerous towering peaks, separated by a tall wall. Just passing through the grand entrance in front of him would allow entry. Just then, the voice of Blue Spirit came from the wooden doll in Jong's hand. "Are you nervous?" Jong didn't respond, and Blue Spirit reminded him, "You'd better start getting nervous. Given your current strength, if you encounter a real expert, you probably won't last half a round." In fact, Jong's growth had been incredibly fast. In just a month, he had leaped from a third-rate level to a first-class master, thanks largely to the death chi he had absorbed at the Mock Sword Manor, giving him the equivalent of half a century's worth of chi. However, Blue Spirit appeared calm on the surface, but was still filled with deep worries. After all, places filled with death chi like the Mock Sword Manor were not commonly found. Moreover, once Jong stepped into the pinnacle realm, he could no longer rely solely on absorbing death chi for cultivation. He would need to comprehend on his own to further improve. Otherwise, he might remain stagnant for the rest of his life. If Jong wants to undertake the legacy of the Moon Division, not only do they need to become stronger faster, but they also need some luck. While Blue Spirit analyzed the current situation, Jong suddenly noticed something unusual, as the convoy did not enter the city through the main gate, but moved along the wall towards another direction. Jong, puzzled, suddenly had the carriage door pushed open by Cho Yugong, who appeared panicked and said, "There's a problem." Before Jong could even ask, Cho Yugong pulled an item from his clothes and, without hesitation, handed it to Jong. No time to explain. "Put this on quickly." It was an ancient ring, engraved with tiny spell characters. "As long as you wear this, even without talismans, you can use magic." Jong was curious why Cho Yugong would give him this, but Cho Yugong did not explain and just muttered to himself, "Such an absurd thing to happen. I thought they wouldn't do this since you were a hostage, but I didn't expect you to be sent there." Cho Yugong sighed. It turned out that just then, the leader of the Heaven-Earth Association had personally ordered that the Mock brothers be sent to Corpse Blood Valley. As a testing ground for the Heaven-Earth Association, countless youths are sent there each year, but less than 10% survive. There is no mercy or kindness there, only endless slaughter and corpses everywhere. Jong had not yet entered the valley, but from Cho Yugong's words, he could already deeply feel the terror and bloodiness of the Corpse Blood Valley. Cho Yugong clenched his fists, unwilling in his heart. His brilliant disciple, whom he had found with great difficulty, was about to be thrown into such a place to die. "I will report to the chief immediately and get you out," he said excitedly to Jong. "During this time, you must find a way to survive." Just as he finished speaking, a cold voice came from outside the carriage. "This is as far as it goes. From now on, no one but the testers is allowed to enter." A group of people wearing red scarves and masks stopped the carriage, staring intently at Jong with their eerie eyes. "Welcome to the Corpse Blood Valley." Before Jong could truly enter the inner parts of the Heaven-Earth Association, he was sent to the Corpse Blood Valley. As a testing ground for the Heaven-Earth Association, anyone who enters must go through a life-or-death ordeal, and less than 1 in 10 survive. At this time, Mok Yuchan was also moving into the valley with the crowd. Over the past month, except for meal times, he had been almost continuously unconscious and knew nothing about the place he was going to. However, he spotted Mok Jae-won in the crowd, shouted out, and prepared to push through the crowd to ask Mok Jae-won for clarity, but the next second he was hit on the back by a warrior's club. Though his acupoints had been released, his inner power was sealed, and he could only obediently follow orders, moving forward quietly like a captive. Unlike Mok Yuchin's panic, Jong appeared unusually calm. He had already sensed the problem through Cho Yugong's warning. Now, the only thing that puzzled him was why everyone here had their inner power sealed with silver needles, including himself and Mok Yuchin. He asked Blue Spirit for the reason, but she was also clueless. She only knew that such a situation had never happened before in the Heaven-Earth Association and reminded Jong to be careful as this place was very sinister. Thus, after about 3 hours of marching, the crowd finally reached a wide, shallow valley. By now, many youths had gathered, including the team with Mok Jiangwon, totaling at least 800 people. As they arrived, a deafening voice rang out, "Welcome to the Corpse Blood Valley." Instantly, all eyes were fixed on the figure standing on the platform ahead. Wearing a demon mask and hands behind his back, he stood proudly. He said, "From now on, you will undertake the first task." As he spoke, he pulled out a fingertip-sized iron ball from his pocket. As the crowd looked on in confusion, the demon-masked man continued, "In the waters of this valley, there are many iron balls like this. You need to find them within a specified time, or you will face the penalty of death." Upon this proclamation, the crowd instantly became agitated. Now deep into the night, although there were warriors holding torches, finding these tiny iron balls in the darkness was like searching for a needle in a haystack. At that moment, a youth raised his hand and said, "We are all elites selected from our own sex, yet now we are to lose our lives over a small iron ball. Isn't this too excessive?" Before he could finish, a plop sound was heard as the iron ball in the hand of the demon-masked man pierced through his head. Everyone around immediately showed shocked expressions and began to panic. The demon-masked man spoke loudly again, "Here, strength, status, and all other identities will lose their meaning. The only thing you must do is obey commands unconditionally. Those who question or resist will lose their lives." Instantly, the area fell dead silent. The previously noisy valley suddenly quieted down, and faced with the threat of death, everyone was terrified. Even Jong is quiet in the crowd. The scene shifts to a room somewhere where Cho Yugong paces back and forth anxiously, with Sun Yun by his side, equally anxious. Cho Yugong, full of indignation, asked, "Why didn't you tell the leader that I had already taken him as a disciple?" To this, Sun Yun responded with disdain, "It would have been useless. When have you ever seen the leader retract an order?" Cho Yugong fell silent. As Sun Yun said, once the leader issued an order, it was never retracted, and sometimes those who failed to execute the order were even severely punished. Thinking of this, Cho Yugong knew that persuading the leader was almost impossible, but having finally found such a usable disciple, how could he bear to lose him? In fact, Sun Yun also felt the same regret. Jong was the first person who could recite the content of the Human Skin book, which many had died trying to read without understanding it, not to mention that he had also learned the long-lost lunar vein sword technique. Now, without even meeting the leader, Jong was sent to the Corpse Blood Valley, a decision that Sun Yun found hard to understand. Suddenly, Sun Yun's gaze sharpened. Could it be that the leader sent that boy to the Corpse Blood Valley to test him? Just then, the demon-masked man lit a long incense stick and coldly reminded, "Let me also tell you, the number of iron balls in the valley is far less than the number of people present. You better start moving quickly." The trial in the Corpse Blood Valley finally began. At the command of the demon-masked man, the youth who had been hesitating rushed into the valley. Over 800 people running at the same time made the ground seem to shake. Seeing this scene, Mok Yuchin cursed silently in his heart, feeling he had really bad luck. At this point, he had no choice. Even though Mok Jiangwon was his half-brother from the same father, he had to find an iron ball first, or else he would die. Just as everyone jumped into the water and frantically searched for iron balls, Mok Yuchin accidentally noticed that Mok Jiangwon was standing still, seemingly aloof. What is this guy doing? Does he really not fear death? Mok Yuchin wondered in his heart, but he had no time to ponder further. Finding a small iron ball in such darkness was no easy task. The area was filled with the anxious voices of youths groping in the water, with their fingers inevitably getting injured. Soon, much time had passed. Just then, a voice suddenly rang out across the valley. "I found one." A youth held up the iron ball he had just picked up and shouted excitedly. At that moment, his hand holding the iron ball was mangled, but he still smiled broadly. On one hand, he was relieved that he wouldn't have to die, and on the other, he was thrilled to have distinguished himself. However, this scene also aroused jealousy and hostility among the onlookers. As the boy holding the iron ball walked toward the stands, a burly youth madly rushed toward him. At this moment, although the boy with the iron ball was already exhausted, he still desperately ran forward. However, his pursuer clearly had no intention of giving up, shouting as he chased, "Kid, if I catch you, I'll smash you into a pancake." Fortunately, there was a significant difference in their speeds, and it wasn't long before a considerable distance was created. The boy with the iron ball showed a smug expression, but before he could enjoy his triumph for long, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking his way. Mok Jiangwon stood there with his hands behind his back, his face expressionless. The boy with the iron ball was stunned, thinking to himself, "When did this guy get ahead of me?" He soon realized that Mok Jiangwon had never entered the valley. At the same time, The demon-masked man had witnessed the entire scene, a hint of mockery flashing in his eyes as he took interest in watching this group of youths perform. Faced with such a dilemma, the boy with the iron ball made a startling move. "Since you all want to steal my iron ball, then no one shall have it." Saying this, he swallowed the iron ball without hesitation. Seeing this, the burly youth cursed loudly. "To think I've been busy for nothing in the end." However, before he could finish, Mok Jae-won moved swiftly forward, instantly grabbing the throat of the boy with the iron ball. At that moment, Mok Jae-won's lips curled into a sinister smile. "You've really made things complicated." Saying this, his fingers inadvertently pressed hard against the other's throat. Before the boy with the iron ball could react, a pfft sound was heard as Mok Jae-won's palm went straight through his neck. As they watched the throat being brutally torn open, the entire place fell into a dead silence. Not just the youth participating in the trial, even the surrounding guards felt a chill run down their spines. The burly youth, who had been shouting moments ago, now collapsed on the ground in terror, especially after making eye contact with Mok Jae-won's demonic gaze, feeling as though his heart was about to burst. As the saying goes, once your momentum is suppressed, no matter how strong you are, you will lose the courage to confront your opponent. Faced with the ruthlessly brutal Mok Jae-won, no one dared to step forward to stop him, and everyone was marked with a deep imprint of fear, only able to watch helplessly as Mok Jae-won handed over the iron ball. At that moment, Blue Spirit also showed a hint of excitement, for Jong's actions seemed to trigger some changes here, a perfect start for her plan of revenge against the Heaven-Earth Association. On the other side, the demon-masked man, looking at the blood-stained iron ball in Mok Jae-won's hand, became even more interested in Jong. He softly said, "Congratulations on passing the first trial." To get the iron ball without entering the water was something that had never happened before in previous trials. It seems this kid had planned it all from the start. Thinking this, he pulled out an item from his pocket, flicked his fingers, and tossed it to Mok Jae-won. It was a round silver medal engraved with the character 1. "This is your proof of passing the first trial," said the demon-masked man. "Keep it and the iron ball well." He then instructed the guards to take Mok Jae-won aside to rest. Mok Jae-won did not linger. After securing the items, he followed the guards to one side. At this moment, watching Jong's unruffled back, the demon-masked man fell into thought. Until now, he had been puzzled why the leader would let a child from a reputable family participate in the trial, perhaps intending to torture him before killing him. But now, it seemed not so. Indeed, the leader would not send them here without reason. If the leader had seen Mok Jae-won's performance just now, he would also be surprised. Compared to his reputable family background, Mok Jae-won's nature seemed more akin to those from the demonic path. This made the demon-masked man even more interested in Jong's upcoming trials. Meanwhile, Jong sat on a stone nearby, studying the silver medal in his hand. From the demon-masked man's words, he had guessed the true nature of the Corpse Blood Valley trial. The reason the survival rate here was less than 10% was that the Heaven-Earth Association wanted to filter out useful talents through competition. It looked like the upcoming trials would be even more intense. Indeed, the melee in the shallow valley became more intense. To fight for the iron balls, youths participating in the trial killed each other, and whenever someone found an iron ball, it would attract others' attacks. Gradually, they learned to keep silent after picking up an iron ball, but as soon as they prepared to leave the water surface, they would be spotted and attacked. During this, one youth seized the chance to leave but was suddenly sent flying with a slap from a bald youth covered in strange tattoos. Seeing these tattoos, youths who had intended to snatch the ball immediately stopped in their tracks, their faces showing terror because the tattoos indicated that this person came from Scarlet Death Valley. Scarlet Death Valley, as one of the 3 most infamous organizations under the Heaven-Earth Association, although only having over 30 disciples, its notoriety was enough to terrify anyone in the martial world. Each one was a master. After handing over the iron ball, the bald youth walked disappointedly towards Mok Jae-won, snorting disdainfully, "A bunch of useless trash." Then he quietly threatened Mok Jae-won, "Don't think you can surpass me in the next round, because I will kill you with my own hands." Hearing this blatant threat, Mok Jae-won just gave a cold smile, unwilling to waste energy on such unnecessary matters. Meanwhile, the slaughter in the valley continued, featuring a few particularly conspicuous figures. Among them, a short-haired girl with a pale face, but wherever she went, youth rushing towards her invariably fell to the ground. Even without using internal power, she mercilessly killed people with just a stone in her hand. She was an assassin from the Manhwa House. The once Manhwa House was one of the 4 major assassin organizations, which later withdrew from the assassination business and joined the Heaven-Earth Association. The second notable figure was a youth as sturdy as a calf, from the sect known in the martial world for its external skills, Baekhyun sect. They primarily focused on physical training, and even with their internal power sealed, they could still demonstrate extraordinary strength here. Besides them, some other youths also displayed exceptional talent, easily passing the first trial. As time went on, the remaining time also grew shorter. At this moment, Mok Yu-chun was still searching in the water, but no matter how hard he tried, he could never find a trace of the iron ball. His heart was filled with confusion and anger. Why did he, just a hostage, have to participate in this damn trial? At that time, Mok Yu-chan started to have thoughts of retreating, wondering if perhaps he could just plead with the demon-masked man for forgiveness. However, just then, a youth holding an iron ball next to him was suddenly beheaded. The guard wiped the blood off his blade and coldly said, "Didn't I say not to ask questions at random?" This scene completely stunned Mok Yu-chan. At that moment, he finally understood that here, no matter who you are, if you don't follow the rules, the only outcome is death. What he didn't know was that the boy was killed because the iron ball he was holding was the one initially thrown out by the demon-masked man, which had no number engraved on it. Mok Jae-won sensed something odd. The death chi was spreading through the valley and silently converging towards him. So, to test if he can absorb the death chi, he extended his hand into the air, following the flow of the death chi, and began to chant a spell. Unexpectedly, as soon as he spoke the spell, the surrounding death chi seemed to be summoned, rapidly gathering into his palm. This scene excited him greatly. As he had suspected, even with his internal power sealed, he was still able to smoothly operate his techniques. It seemed the techniques from the human skin book were indeed marvelous. With this realization, he no longer hesitated and began greedily absorbing the surrounding death chi. As the death chi continuously flowed into his body, he felt as if he had returned to Mok Sword Manor, only the death chi here was much denser than before. Watching youths still fiercely fighting, Mok Jae-won's eyes turned even redder. Yes, keep killing each other. The more they kill, the more death chi he could absorb. As time ticked away, only 1 minute remained in the first trial, yet many youths were still killing each other over the iron balls. At this time, Mok Yu-chan had pinned a youth down, punching him repeatedly in the face. At that moment, the intense desire to survive seemed to awaken the demon inside Mok Yu-chan. After he had beaten the youth beneath him to a bloody pulp, Mok Yu-chan finally stopped his fists, trembling as he picked up the blood-stained iron ball, collapsing into the water, his gaze vacant. He couldn't remember how many he had killed to get that iron ball, feeling as though he had turned into a beast, where, to survive, there was no other way but to kill. Just then, the long incense burned down to its last flicker. At the same time, the voice of the demon-masked man rang out again. "The trial is over. All those who did not get an iron ball will be killed without mercy." Instantly, the valley was filled with wails of agony. As the youth's internal powers were sealed, they had no way to resist against the armed guards. Watching the bodies fall around him, Mok Yu-chan was stunned. He had just obtained an iron ball and hadn't had the chance to hand it over. Was he also destined to die like the others? Just then, an armed guard approached him. Mok Yu-chan, in a daze, slowly raised the iron ball in his hand. At that moment, fear completely overwhelmed him. However, to his surprise, the guard patted him on the shoulder and said, "Passed," then turned and walked away. Instantly, all the tension and fear vanished. He collapsed to the ground, and the first thought that came to his mind was, "I survived." However, when he saw his hands covered in blood, a wave of guilt overwhelmed him. What have I done? Although he knew he had fought desperately to survive, he still couldn't accept this version of himself. Thus, from the original 800+ participants, only 468 remained. When the demon-masked man heard the final number, he burst out laughing. It turned out that 60% had survived. He seemed very pleased with this result. However, he showed no concern for those who had died. He congratulated the youths below. "Congratulations on passing the first trial." The youths just listened quietly. In the 2 hours of the trial, they had fought with all their might to survive. Though they were exhausted now, they were secretly relieved to have lived. Watching them, the demon-masked man continued, "You should know by now, each iron ball is engraved with a different number. Please remember them well, as they will serve as your only identifier here. Let's begin the second trial immediately." Hearing the demon-masked man's words, those youths who hadn't had time to catch their breath immediately stirred, especially those who had barely passed as the candle was about to burn out. Their faces showed pain. They had thought they could rest well after the first trial, but instead, they were thrown right into the next one. Mok Yu-chan looked the same. He hadn't recovered his strength yet, and he didn't know how much longer he could last. The demon-masked man ignored their reactions, clapped his hands, and gently pointed to the mountain across. "From now until dawn, you just need to survive on that mountain." Hearing this, the youths breathed a sigh of relief. Although it was deep into the night, there were still about 3 hours until dawn. If that was all, they just needed to find a good place to hide, which would allow them to rest well and easily pass the trial. However, how could things be that simple? The demon-masked man spoke coldly. "The second trial also has restrictions. There are 40 flags planted on the mountain across. When dawn breaks, you need to be near one of the flags, but only 8 people can stand around each flag. If there are more than 8 people or fewer than 8, it will be considered a trial failure, and those who fail will be executed." As soon as this was announced, the scene was in uproar again. Mok Yu-chan also showed a look of shock. At least 500 people had survived the first trial, but there were only 40 flags on the mountain. This meant that only 320 people could survive, signaling that another round of bloody trials was about to begin. The place fell silent, as if everyone was pondering the difference in this trial. However, they quickly realized the key was teamwork. Once someone found a flag, to hold it, 8 people must cooperate for the remainder of the time. This was full of variables, as the method of cooperation would directly determine whether the team could effectively hold on. At this moment, everyone naturally turned turned their eyes to each other. They didn't rush to blindly search for flags, but began to communicate and form teams. Among them, the bald youth who had passed the first trial early quickly caught everyone's attention. Being able to join his team or recruit him to their own would surely be an advantage in this trial. However, faced with their invitations, the bald youth directly chose to reject. Now, both in terms of physical strength and ability, he held the upper hand, so he planned to make good use of this by teaming up with someone of equal strength. Only in this way could he conserve energy before the start of the third round. Thus, he approached the youth who was strong as an ox and straightforwardly invited him, "Since our strengths are comparable, why don't we team up? That way, we'll have a better chance of getting through the second round." Hearing the bald youth's words, the burly youth pondered for a moment and indeed thought it was a good strategy, but he still immediately declined the invitation. "I'll think about teaming up after I find a flag," he said this and, without turning back, walked away. He did this to conceal his own strength, because eventually they would compete against each other, and he didn't want his abilities to be understood so soon. The bald youth, furious, blurted out, "You'll regret this," and then turned to invite the girl from the Manhwa house. However, before he could speak, he was ruthlessly rejected. With no other choice, the bald youth could only shut his mouth in frustration. It seemed from the start, cooperating with these people was unlikely. As he seethed with anger, Jong approached him proactively, asking, "Do you want to team up with me?" The bald youth was startled, not expecting anyone to approach him voluntarily. Could it be that the other had the same idea? Although teaming up with Jong didn't seem too bad, the sight of Jong enjoying himself gave him a chilling feeling. Out of instinct, he chose to decline. Watching the bald youth's retreating back, Blue Spirit couldn't help but laugh. "You got rejected. It seems the scene of you tearing someone's throat open had quite an impact on them." Jong sighed, then his face twisted into a sinister smile. "I was actually planning on killing him first, but according to Blue Spirit, finding teammates was now very difficult for him. Perhaps he should listen to Blue Spirit's advice and try a different way to pass the trials." As he pondered his next move, a short-haired youth cautiously approached him, asking, "Do you need a teammate?" Surprised that someone was inviting him to join their team, Jong was taken aback. Before he could respond, the short-haired youth continued, "Our team just needs one more person. Would you like to join us?" Jong turned to look in the direction the short-haired youth was pointing. There were 6 youths there. Among them, a beautiful girl sat in the center, with 5 other youths circled around her like guards, clearly indicating that the team was centered around her. The girl also waved at Jong to signal him. Jong smiled slightly and immediately agreed. Meanwhile, seeing that Mok Jaehyun had already formed a team, Mok Yuchan also sighed. Although he and Mok Jaehyun were brothers, he had considered joining forces but ultimately gave up. Mok Jaehyun's life or death was irrelevant to him. After all, he had also found a team. The most important thing now was to ensure his own survival. Thus, Mok Yuchan convinced himself internally. Just then, the drumbeat signaling the start of the second trial rang out. The youths all rushed towards the mountain. As before, moving early was advantageous. However, the warriors watching them couldn't help but sneer, knowing this round would be much harder than the youths imagined. The scene shifted, and Jong's small team had already entered the woods, with Jong following quietly behind. At this point, a youth whispered to the girl in the center of the team, "Is it really okay to have this guy in our team?" The others had similar doubts, as everyone else avoided Jong if they could. To this, the girl chuckled lightly and said, "Are you scared? Don't worry. Trust me, having him with us is beneficial. At least those who are afraid of him won't dare to attack us. Besides, he can tear people's throats out with his bare hands. We need to make good use of someone with such strength." In fact, from the beginning, they had planned to use Jong and then dispose of him. Although he was strong, they believed that 7 people could surely subdue him. They had even arranged for someone to follow at the back of the team to maintain a certain distance from the others. As soon as Jong died, their companion would appear to fill the gap. The girl smugly ridiculed those fools who had easily given up such a good card. As they delved deeper into the woods, the girl was surprised to find that Jong was actually quite handsome. She thought it a waste to not use such a good-looking face, so she quietly moved closer to Jong, starting to make small talk and inquire about his name and background. The girl confidently believed that men were easily seduced by women, especially younger boys who were the easiest to attract. She showed a bit of interest, thinking he would take the bait. However, faced with the girl's advances, Jong remained expressionless. Seeing him unresponsive, the girl leaned in and whispered, "Do you know, you've caught my attention." Jong glanced at her and said with a smile, "I feel the same." Seeing this, the surrounding boys immediately became envious, sending looks of jealousy her way. After speaking, he placed his hand on the girl's shoulder. At this moment, the girl was secretly pleased with herself, as she had anticipated. Just a little initiative on her part, and the other party couldn't resist. Next, she only needed to exploit the fool's jealousy, and they would become even more loyal to her. Just as she was smug about her perfect plan, with a snap, Jong unhesitatingly broke her neck. The air fell instantly silent, and the girl didn't even have time to scream before she died on the spot. The others were stunned. They had thought Jong would be manipulated by the girl, but instead, he was ruthlessly decisive, ending her life in an instant. They stood by, too shocked to speak. Nobody expected such a thing to happen. At that moment, a youth shouted, "What on earth have you done, you maniac?" However, faced with the youth's youth's accusation, the corners of Zhang's mouth slightly lifted, as if everything around him was engulfed in a crimson light. He laughed and said, "Well then, it's dinner time now." Hearing this, the youths were extremely shocked. Just then, Zhang gave an ominous smile. "Thank you for the meal.